Welcome back, everyone. It's time to continue exploring Irithyll, the Boreal Valley. We made some good progress last time, but the worst is still to come. We picked up Chameleon at the end of last video from the surreptitious assassin over there. This is essentially an infinitely reusable white branch tree. Young white branch. The thing that the giant recognizes us for and doesn't shoot at and makes us turn into things. I'm extremely eloquent right now, but that's what Chameleon does. It has applications. They're usually quite esoteric, but they're there. There doesn't seem to be a hidden path from this angle, but maybe we'll find something later. That room is certainly suspicious. The roster of knights is also a somewhat conspicuous item for an otherwise fairly unremarkable little save area. All will be revealed in good time. This area introduces us to our next big threat. Invisible fuckers. These Irithyllian slaves spend most of their time largely invisible and can only really be identified by their white eyes. This fading soul is a fairly obvious trap to try and introduce you to the mechanic of Irithyllian slaves hiding in the darkness, or just in plain sight, because they can do that. If you helped out Cirrus earlier on the bridge, then Kraton the Wanderer will invade you here, keen on revenge. He is a marginally more difficult fight without an extra body, but the same tactics largely apply. The main difficulty you'll run into fighting Kraton is just how much health you have to chip through. Not only is he quite beefy, he can also heal himself with impunity. However, it is honestly not that much different from the fight on the bridge. In some ways, it's almost easier because you don't have to worry about Cirrus's welfare. Like most NPC fights in this game, you can stagger him fairly easily. So, a conservative strategy wherein you go for a couple of hits, stagger him, and then quickly roll out before he can retaliate is a perfectly acceptable, if somewhat boring, way to defeat him. For our victory, we get his axe, the Dragon Slayer axe. It's a nice enough weapon. I've used it a little bit in other playthroughs. It's enchanted with lightning naturally. And it has the just normal one-handed axe moveset, so it's pretty good. Nothing to write home about, but sometimes that's what the best weapons are. The point of that entire diversion was mostly the Undead Bone Ash. If you haven't bothered with Cirrus's questline, then it's basically just the hiding Irithyllians and the Corvian guarding the grave. It's fairly unremarkable. There's a very interesting variety of dog up here. But like all Dark Souls dogs, they must be taken out with extreme prejudice. There's 3 of them cooped up in here, and they can take you by surprise if you come charging in. You have to check, okay? been a long time since I played this game. Moving on. A torch is useful in this dark area, but it's not quite so dark that you can't see what you're doing. In fact, I found that having it as dark as it can be actually makes it easier to spot the invisible slaves. There's two varieties. Some are upright and ambulatory, others crawl along the ground. The crawling ones have less health and are generally less threatening, but they have fairly sudden and difficult to read attacks. That can make them get some easy chip damage in on you. The ones that stand up tend to have more of a wind-up time. Even if you know they're there, some of these slaves can be hidden very, very cleverly. And even if you do see them coming, they can sort of just attack you out of nowhere because they will sort of phase in and out depending on where you are in relation to them. That's just an NPC phantom. Don't worry about it, me. The extra little animation they do when they die to fire is a little bit annoying because it does trip me up a couple of times. But overall, the extra damage from the flame mark is probably worth it. While I technically do not have enough strength to wield the Executioner's Greatsword in one hand, that does not necessarily mean that it's useless when used as such. 82 damage is not a lot, but it's certainly enough to finish off a low-health enemy. It's a bit of a change from previous games in the series, where not being able to wield something in one hand, or in general, just really makes the weapon useless. It's not something I would necessarily recommend doing, but if you're in a bad situation, it's not the end of the world. At this point, it is sort of helpful to actually get out your torch or some other light source just so you can see what you're doing and not fall. It doesn't do a particularly large amount of falling damage, but it wastes time, and when you're on camera, you want to avoid doing that. This area is largely optional. There's only 1 or 2 treasures up here. Going unlocked with your sorceries and pyromancies like that can be difficult, but sometimes it's worth it just to snipe off enemies before they have a chance to retaliate. You might end up wasting some FP though. Our reward for navigating the rafters is Yorshka's Spear. Yorshka is also who the church is named after. Yorshka's Spear is an interesting weapon that does both strike and pierce damage. I don't believe we have the stats to use it, but I might look into it at a later date. It's kind of unique. I think better of it. I don't think there's any actual reason to go down that way. actual illusionary wall here hiding a crystal lizard. With not much in the way to escape, so it's a fairly gimme kill. In the other pockets under this bridge, mostly hide Irithyllian slaves. There's a unique mechanic here that's not really seen elsewhere in this area, wherein one slave at the end will scream and make the other ones more aggressive. About Chaos Bed Vestiges is that even if you're not 100% on your aim, there's a good chance you'll hit something just because it's such a wide projectile. Some variants of blades can actually use basic sorceries, which don't do very much damage, but since they're invisible and often come in groups, it can pile up quickly. You need to be aware, or at least willing to go after them exclusively if you're in a big group and you're getting pecked down. The chances of me actually finding a new illusory wall that I didn't know about are very low. But even so, I will dutifully whack any suspicious-looking walls because I don't know. It's at this point that I remember that I haven't actually changed my ring setup in over a year, and I decide to demo the Silver Cat ring here. These falls are severe enough that they would inflict minor damage, but with the cat ring, we take none. For some reason, I'm wearing rings that are boosting my sorceries and not my pyromancies, so it's time to change that. Proper ring setup is actually very important for caster builds, because due to the limited and somewhat dangerous nature of casting spells, you need to make sure that each cast does as much damage as possible. Fortunately, Chaos Bed Vestiges is powerful enough that you don't really have to worry about it at this stage, but later on it will definitely become a thing. This is a new type of enemy, the Sewer Centipede. This is not technically a sewer, but these enemies are fairly not dangerous if you know that they're there. They can take you by surprise if you're not paying attention. They like to hang out in these shallow, watery areas just below the surface. But even if they do come at you before you can kill them, they stagger very easily. There's not much to them, one way or another. I believe that they do have some moves that can poison or even toxic you, but it's not really a concern because they go down so easily. This is actually the area that the bridge at the very beginning was overlooking. And if you neglected to kill the Pontiff Beast up there, he will actually jump down from the bridge at you in this area. And I would say that this is actually a more difficult area to fight that thing. Mostly because the water will impede your movement a little bit, and there are some enemies down here that can complicate the matter. There are some sewer centipede corpses littered here and there, sort of made to throw you off the track. There's also a somewhat random man grub here with the Great Heal Miracle. Great Heal is the next in the series of the Heal Miracles and does more or less what's on the tin. It heals, but more greatly. The Heal Miracles tend to be more useful if you are unfamiliar with the game and need to stretch out your healing more, or if you're doing a lot of co-op, because it can heal other friendly characters in your vicinity. Sometimes in the midst of attacks, they would almost certainly kill your friend. grapples with multi-stage damage instances are a good instance of this. You can actually save people in the middle of these attacks with a well-timed heal miracle if you're in the area. No, it's not. Don't do that. Now, there's something very important up here that I should note. If you are doing NPC quest lines, then you do want to hit this bonfire. It's not necessary for it, it's just a good thing to do. However, hit the bonfire and go no further. If you transition to the next area leading from this bonfire before certain flags are met, then everything is ruined forever. So don't do it, just save yourself the trouble. Hit the bonfire, rest at it, get a checkpoint, and continue on into Irithyll. We will explore what lies beyond later. Don't worry about it. It's just for now, it's very important that we continue going in the city proper. It is this area from which the sewer centipedes actually get their name, because this is a sewer. They're more aggressive in here, so it's more difficult to sneak up on them and take them out before they're a problem. The somewhat limited space in here and disgusting surroundings can make fighting them more difficult, especially since there's multiples and they can come after you in groups. Beginning to feel like that this Chaos Fed Vestiges sort of trivializes a good amount of the game. I think I'll have to maybe take that into account when recording more videos. Make sure I do other things instead of just throwing giant death fireballs. I usually don't play as casters because it tends to go like this. You struggle for like the first 2/3 of the game, then when you finally hit your stride, everything just sort of dies. Let's just not talk about this area anymore, okay? Through the door is a most welcome sight. It's Sigurd. He's also made some Estus soup, but we don't need it right this instant. Seems like a shame to wake him up, but we should say hi.
Excuse me, I must have dozed off. It's rather warm in here. Well, hasn't it been all too long? It's good to see you. Oh, I seem to have missed my chance, so I, Siegwart of Katarina, offer my deepest gratitude, and a little surprise to go with it. It's all yours. I know. Won't you join me for dinner? I make a fine Estus soup. I've got some stewing right now. Even we undead deserve a little normalcy from time to time. And finally, upon this rendezvous, let us make a toast. To your valor, my sword, and our sworn duties. Long may the sun shine.
You actually do get healed upon this exchange, which is a nice touch. And it seems only appropriate to meet a toast with a toast.
Have you heard? Somewhere, hidden right here in Irithyll, is a deep dungeon. And even below that, the profaned capital, home of Yom, the reclusive giant lord. That reminds me. I've a grave promise to keep. Oh, sorry. I'm afraid I've cast a cloud over things. Well, I'm going to have myself a little nap. The only thing to do, really, after a nice toast.
I have no idea how he does it, but it's quite impressive. At any rate, that's an important conversation for a bunch of reasons. Make sure to exhaust his dialogue, and exhaust him so he goes to sleep, so that the proper flags are met to continue with your quests. Not only is it important for Siegward's own questline, it also ties into Greyrat's quest. We will see why in a little bit. Also, I just want to note that having a door that leads directly into the sewers from the kitchen is maybe not the best idea, but, maybe they had something going on there. I don't know. I don't want to think about it. We saw a Black Knight earlier in the Road of Sacrifices, and now we meet their counterparts, the Silver Knights. The Silver Knights stayed behind when the Black Knights went with Lord Gwyn to link the fire and face the demons and all that wonderful stuff. That sneak attack backstab never works. I've tried it so many times, and it just never goes through. That dickhead with the arrow will always notice you, or the guy will turn around right before you can do it, and it's awful. Don't do it. Don't be me. At any rate, the Silver Knights tend to be more manageable than the Black Knights because they have smaller weapons and are generally less fearsome and battle-ready, though they certainly make up for it in numbers and group tactics. You rarely face Silver Knights alone. The Black Knights are comparatively few in number, but the Silver Knights are like the remnants of a proper regimented army. There's 3 in this room alone. They're quite adept at covering you, or covering each other, and you, I guess, with great bow coverage, and great bow arrows hurt a lot. They have a lot of stagger, and they knock you flat on your ass most of the time. So it's good to try and separate these guys. Now, my particular build sort of has trouble with these. They don't stagger particularly easy, and they're somewhat resistant to magic just because they have a lot of health. So if you do get off, say, a Chaos Bed Vestiges in their direction and it hits, that's good, but there's no guarantee they will stagger from it, and they might come and hit you with a counterattack before you can recover from the animation. They're a lot easier with a strong shield. The urns in this area have a peculiar tendency. When you break them, they will leave behind a sort of patch of cold air that will inflict frostbite. Or flat damage on enemies, apparently. It's a somewhat interesting mechanic that is not seen almost anywhere else, actually. I think this is the only room that does it. And even if there are others, it never really comes up in a practical sense. This whole second floor area is optional, but it does have some interesting relics in it. A Divine Blessing, the Leo Ring, and Smo's Great Hammer. Along with the presence of the Silver Knights, it seems that the Irithyllian nobility had some ties to the old aristocracy. Now, this area is very unassuming, but it's also deceptively very difficult. There are a couple of things that I have done to make it more difficult for myself, intentionally or otherwise. seems that other players who have gone through here recently find themselves in agreement. The thing that all players will have to deal with are these dogs, which, as always, are terribly dangerous and can kill you quite easily. If you have made Yuri of Londor hostile, then the Londor Pale Shade will invade for a second time in this area. And he is actually quite a bit more dangerous here, both because his stats are greater, and because he is not hampered at all by the swamp. There is no swamp here. He can do a lot of damage in a hurry, and even more if he actually manages to bleed. Stop it, I'm already dead! I got caught off guard there. I completely failed to respect his damage output, and I thought I could get one more swing in to kill him, but this character only has 12 endurance, so no such luck. It might seem like a bit of a trek to get back there, but it's actually not too difficult. Here I will demonstrate an age-old strategy known and beloved to most Dark Souls players. Running past everything, because who has time for that shit, honestly? It might seem like a bad idea to leave all of these angry sewer centipedes be, but there's a secret. They can't fit through the door. Or they had no interest in trying to fit through the door. I'll take advantage of that Estus soup for a free heal. It's important to get value in all things, after all. The Silver Knights in this room don't actually respawn, so you can just run right through. And without much trouble at all, we're back to where we died. Made even more easy by the fact that we were sort of driven back by the Londor Pale Shade. And the dogs. Fuck those dogs. Jesus Christ. Well, time for round 2. It would be nice if I could get the one hit on these dogs with my Hearth's flame-marked swords, but I can't. So I just sort of have to deal with it. At a distance, the Pale Shade will attack with affinity and throwing knives. If nothing else, they're quite versatile. However, they're not very heavily armored. I learned my lesson this time and I just back off. Until I get no stamina for another swing. The Pale Shade doesn't seem intent on using Estus. And with that invasion taken care of, the Pale Shade will bother us no more. Still, this area is not done. There's more to deal with. I mentioned earlier that some of the Pale Shades, the Irithyllian slaves, which are also Pale Shades to be perfectly honest, can use sorcery. There's multiple of them up here, raining down their little pew-pews, covering each other, and just generally being a nuisance. Like I said, the damage is not impressive. But it comes at a fairly good clip, so it's difficult to actually find a time to attack without taking some chip. There's also more dogs up here. This dog is capable of inflicting frostbite. Also, the dogs have weirdly human heads, and it's kind of unsettling. Likely this has something to do with the Pontiff and Sullivan beast that we faced earlier. There's another frostbite dog hiding back here. Being covered by the sorcerers in the back makes it a difficult opponent, so it's best to lure it back here. Once the dogs are gone, the sorcerers themselves aren't that big of a deal. The gravestone in the center makes for adequate cover. And if you just make sure to sort of stagger your attacks and roll in between them, you should be able to dodge any sorceries that come at you from the covering slave. Some things never change. Once you've cleared this area, you're rewarded with a shortcut. This lift takes you back up to that sort of central square from earlier, where all of the Pontiff Knights and Fire Witches were patrolling. It's useful enough, I suppose, but there's a better shortcut fairly close ahead, so it's one of those things where you wonder why they bothered. If I had the presence of mind, I would have equipped the Silver Cat Ring to save myself the damage, but sometimes it's just not worth the time. Usually you want to equip it in sections where you know that you're going to take a lot of sustained falling damage, of which there are a fairly puzzling amount in this game. You'd think after 3 games they would have learned that Dark Souls platforming is not something that players actually enjoy. Going into the tower from this direction makes the encounter generally easier because you take out the snipers from up above first. And as you can see, there are a fair number of slaves down in the bottom waiting for us, so if we had come in the other way, we would have had quite a fight on our hands. Using the stairs as a choke point is a very effective way to get rid of these guys without taking much damage. Aiming remains difficult. If I really wanted to be accurate, I would use the binoculars, but it seems like such a waste at this distance. The slaves will occasionally drop blood gems. We do not have the necessary coal to infuse those into our weapons yet, but when used, they will infuse the weapon with a property to inflict bleeding. It's a questionably useful infusion. Bleed is good, like bleed is super good. However, most of the weapons that are good with bleed already have bleed on them. And the way that the infusion sort of interacts with that with other weapons makes for lesser bleed, and it's kind of like whatever. It's okay. There's a new variety of Pontiff Knight guarding the stairs. He uses a great sight, but he dies to Chaos Bed Vestiges all the same. Alright, sorry. I got a quick phone call I needed to attend to in the middle of this, which is always fun. At any rate, Pontiff Knights, the ones with the sights, they're sort of whatever. There only seems to be one of them, actually. And if you want that sight, which is a weapon you can get, you need to farm him. We've reached the end of the area, more or less, but I mentioned a shortcut earlier. Beyond the ominous fog wall lies the obvious boss, along with a couple of NPC summons. We've got Henri and we've got Blackhand Gotthard back from the Abyss Watchers. Why he's here and not there is a matter up for debate, but there is some evidence to indicate that the royalty of Lothric and the royalty of Irithyll were not on the best of terms, so he might have been on some sort of assassination mission. That evidently did not go well for him. We passed this gate much earlier, back in the last video actually. And it opens up the route back to the Church of Yorshka bonfire, where we started. Before we go back there, there's one more thing, though. It's a bit dangerous to go down and get, since you sort of have to fight your way out through all of the Pontiff Knights. But it's a useful ring nonetheless. The Ring of the Sun's Firstborn. This boosts the power of miracles, much like the Witch's Ring does for pyromancies, and the Bellowing Dragon Crest Ring does for sorceries. Young dragon. Anyway, it completes the trifecta of magic boosters. And if you've got a miracle build, it's something you want to pick up. Even if you don't, it can be useful in certain situations. Before we fight the boss, I do rather want to go back to Firelink Shrine and spend these multitudes of souls. I believe at this juncture I am mentally weighing my options. And I believe that I eventually decide to go back. Yeah, here we go.
Welcome, host. Very well, then take
It's
note.
still intelligence and faith pretty much all the way down, though I do put a point in attunement just for a little bit of extra FP. I don't think I go all the way here. I was just trying to see if I could get an extra slot without too much investment. But it seems that I cannot, so... We're rapidly reaching that point where pyromancies are going to do a lot of damage. As well as certain other miracles and sorceries that we've yet to run into. One of the game's more esoteric secrets, if you do the whole pissing off Yuria thing and take out the Pale Shade of Londor, after both encounters, you get the set. Which is reasonable light armor, I guess. It's nothing worth really writing home about, but it's certainly a unique look that not many players will have. I'm going to assume that most people will either go along with Yuria or not encounter her at all. I don't quite recall if I show it on camera or not, but if you turn in the ash that we uncovered in the sewers into the Shrine Maiden, she will put dung ties for sale, and it's like, okay, fine, whatever. It's gross. Let's not talk about it. I do so only under great duress. At any rate, with all that taken care of, let's go fight the boss. It's a pretty trivial jaunt from the bonfire now that we've opened up the gate. Now, while we can summon Henri and Goddard, I decided instead to take on this boss alone, because it is noted as one of the better fights in the game. It's a very rousing and fun duel. Pontiff Sullivan is a figure that has actually been behind a great deal of the goings-ons in Dark Souls 3 that's never really elucidated in any, like, overt manner. It's something you know from the item descriptions and stuff, which is fairly par for the course of Dark Souls, but you'd think that such an important figure would get a little bit more fanfare. At any rate, Sullivan is a sorcerer's swordsman who wields twin blades. One is on fire, one is in magic. Enchanted, I guess is the real word, but in magic has nothing to do with it. The first part of this fight is fairly easy. Well, not necessarily easy, but fairly straightforward. He doesn't really have any tricks or gimmicks, you just need to have good timing with your dodges. Once you reduce his health to a certain level, he will go into his second phase. He'll grow some wing-like appendages on his back, and he will also start summoning doppelgangers. This part of the fight actually is more manageable in a lot of ways. The doppelganger will telegraph the attack the real Sullivan. To account for the fact that there's two of them on screen at once, his attacks will slow down a little bit. Generally speaking, this makes the fight more easy to deal with because the information you get from the doppelganger, and use that to inform your actions for the real one. It's a neat fight, and it can give people a lot of trouble if they don't know what's going on, or they approach it the wrong way. Sullivan will really wreck you if you try to fight him with a shield. The enchantments on his swords will go right through your blocks, and his attacks do a lot of stamina damage, and they come in really long chains and combos. I spend a lot of time killing the clone, because that will essentially make it so that later he'll have to spend time summoning, which is probably your best bet to attack him. And that was, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but that was a pretty good Sullivan fight. Historically, well actually not historically, when I did this on the blind run I had no trouble at all, but in my other playthroughs, the Sullivan kind of proved a bit of a stonewall. So I left this recording quite happy about it, but hubris is not unknown to me. We'll see later. Until then,